Frederick the Great, the fearless commander leading the front line, the man of enlightenment who had openly preached tolerance, the connoisseur of art, reveling in music, philosophy, and poetry, who would mingle among the most lauded of artisans, at one point having Voltaire as a roommate. Superlatives and amazing feats are near endless for Prussia's finest king. Yet his formative years were rife with pain and outright abuse. Before his ascension, Frederick the Great faced the threat of execution and endured imprisonment by his own father. Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we look at the disturbing life of young King Frederick the Great. Frederick the Great would have a turbulent start to life before he even took the reins of Prussia, namely with his relationship with his father. The young Frederick was studious and something of a bookworm, taking to the arts, culture, and philosophy. His father, however, Frederick William I of Prussia, was regarded as a military giant of sorts, labeled the Soldier King. These two entirely different people, sensibilities, and personalities led to a deep rift between the two. The Soldier King had always wanted his son's education to be rooted in pragmatism and religion. His son's gravitating towards French culture, literature, and music was an affront to him. Resulting from this was a stormy relationship between the two, but the young Frederick was no victor. Dismissed as soft and effeminate, the militaristic Frederick would routinely and frequently beat his son. Furthermore, he would do this publicly and verbally berate him to boot. It's been suggested that at one point, the Soldier King suggested his son kill himself. A bullying and abusive atmosphere was the daily landscape for the young Frederick's start in life. The young Frederick's pressure of having a great soldier and military-minded father didn't end with beatings and humiliation. Frederick the Great's entire childhood was entirely controlled by a father bringing militaristic reality into the freedom of infanthood. In a scenario that wouldn't look out of place in Full Metal Jacket, it's been stated young Frederick was woken each morning as a child by cannon fire. Yep, count yourself lucky your parents only threatened to get you out of bed with a stick of dynamite in the morning. So militarily obsessed with his father, he gave Frederick his own child regiment to instruct and drill at the age of 6. Barely a year later, he was given child-sized munitions. Yet, as a young Frederick increasingly found his own personality and tastes, he and his father only grew apart. As Frederick faced ever-growing beatings for unconscionably harsh reasoning, wearing gloves in winter or falling off a horse, yeah, that actually happened, his rebellion towards his father only grew. Encouraged by his mother and sister Wilhelmina, and no doubt worn down by public criticism and cruelty, Frederick stuck to his ground. A sly example of his underground rebellion was his taste in the arts only growing. His Latin tutor, Jacques Duhan, obtained a secret library of classics for the Crown Prince, 3,000 solid volumes of Greek, Roman, and poetic literature. Though there was only so much outright abuse the prince could take, and soon plotted to flee his father's tyrannical rule. Soon, Frederick the Great found his father's authoritarian rule reaching and altering his private life. At 16, Frederick took to the king's page, Peter Karl Christoph von Keith, himself just 17. In the 1700s, homosexuality was prosecutable by death penalty. It was unlikely advertised or worn with pride in public. Yet Wilhelmina would comment on her brother's kinship with this page as intimate. The two were described as inseparable, and Keith was noted as a huge emotional support for the young Frederick. While the exact details of the relationship remain ambiguous, when Frederick William caught word from the rumor mill, this page was sent away to the Dutch frontier, never to be seen by the young prince again. Following a failed attempt by the family to marry Frederick to Princess Amelia of Great Britain, the young prince furthered his path of defying his father's authority. After Keith's banishment from the prince's reaches, he struck up a companionship with Hans Hermann von Katte. Yet this would prove the boiling point of the ever-troubled father-son dynamic. The two, likely lovers, planned to flee to England, yet were rumbled before they got the chance. Taking flight, particularly as a royal, from Prussia to Great Britain at the time was tantamount to treason. Both Katte and Frederick were charged and arrested by the king, who considered both denying Frederick his right to succession and even having him executed. Yet in 1730, the cruelty that Frederick William had seemingly shown his son for his entire life took a further turn for the worse. On November 6, 1730, the king forced his son to watch as his closest friend and likely lover was beheaded at Kustrin. So viscerally traumatic was this, the young Frederick was said to have passed out before the blow even landed. There was something of a not-so-secret secret, that the king-to-be was gay. It should be stated when his relationship with Keith was ended by his being sent to the Dutch frontier, this was to repent for his sin. King Frederick Wilhelm would burn Andreas Lepps alive in Potsdam for the sin of homosexuality around the time he imprisoned his own son in Kustrin. While the prince was determined to live the life he wanted to, it's probable the horrendous murder of Katta left him viewing his circumstances differently. Just 12 days after the execution, Frederick was released from prison and given a royal pardon. It would take 2 years of hard study and schooling at the War and Estates Department before he would even leave Kustrin. In February 1732, Frederick would finally leave Kustrin under the promise he would honor an arranged marriage to Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Bevern. Yet Frederick the Great would produce no children from this marriage and would eventually be succeeded by his nephew. The king-to-be had come to realize playing his father's image was the way to subdue a family feud. Though this is a tragic tale of suppressed identity and sexuality, the rebellion, independence, and essence of the young prince remained intact. While the death of Katta was an undoubted painful loss for Frederick, it was during his stay in Kustrin that he picked up another long-standing companion. While imprisoned, Frederick would meet Michael Gabriel Fredersdorf, and the two men began what has been described as an intimate friendship. Fredersdorf would write romantically and show considerable concern for Frederick. He would soon be made his valet. Upon his father's death in 1740 and his following ascension, Fredersdorf was made his private treasurer. When Frederick the Great moved to Sanssouci, Fredersdorf's bedroom was adjoining with the king's. The demise of his cruel father gave Frederick the room to honor his own identity. After his ascension, with a marriage that has only ever been performative, Elizabeth Christine and Frederick lived separate lives. They were said to have only been seen together on ceremonial occasions. As king, all of Frederick's courtiers were men, and his extensive collection of art across his several palaces was openly celebratory of homosexuality. Curiously, throughout his marriage to Elizabeth, Frederick forbade her from ever visiting his residence Sanssouci in Potsdam. Despite the cruel lengths that had been taken by his father to deny Frederick his identity, it would appear the rest of Europe was under no such delusions. So renowned was Frederick's all-male court at Sanssouci, les potemistes became a byword for homosexual courtiers within his lifetime. An amazing piece of history, and the closest we may have to a viable account of Frederick's private life comes from none other than Voltaire. Starting with written correspondence, the two were believed to have admired and flirted with one another, beginning a friendship of some 5 decades. Frederick was so enamored with the philosopher, he called for him to live at his residence in Potsdam. Despite a great shared intellectual hunger, the two didn't make the best of roommates. Voltaire would frequently clash with Frederick's social circle, with the enmity escalating till Voltaire had to leave Prussia or face arrest. Though over time the hostility between the two would wane and they would rekindle their correspondence. Their friendship had well and truly passed them by. Voltaire would write his memoirs in the mid-1700s, and they would include much detail on Frederick and the court in Sanssouci. A stolen copy of the manuscript would make its way around Amsterdam following publication in 1784, titled The Private Life of the King of Prussia. Frederick the Great was once again faced with the duality of his life. What the image of him expected running against his reality, in public Frederick showed no care over the book, yet behind closed doors, he had the publication stopped in France, and sought to stop it elsewhere too. Is this the tale of a great man honoring his identity against all odds, or the tale of a survivor at times, violent sexual repression? Maybe like a lot of history, it isn't either or, but both and. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.